He set the scene. My character is a priest, a logistics moneymaker for the church, a banker, if you will. He arrives at a tavern to discuss a potential investment with a farmer who felt it was safer to discuss business at the tavern. I take to the table that is requested by the farmer and am disgruntled by the behavior of a rude gentleman requesting for me to move. He swings at me. Grabbing the only thing that I could find, I grab an orange and pelt him against the head. He decides to back off and leave me alone. None of that broke the logic in that scene. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that the consistencies, at least when it comes to the perception of someone, is based entirely on the perception. Now, not everyone is gifted to take the conceit of a fantasy world where you just say, oh, it's fantasy, it's medieval, blah blah blah, or like, oh, it's science fiction, blah blah blah, because those are genres and they have certain levels of consistency, but they have different spectrums of consistency. So when you say, oh, we're playing a sci-fi game and they're questioning like the logic used by certain people, well, did you define the logic that was done in that science fiction game, or are you assuming that they're defining, that you have defined the logic in that game well enough? I was watching the Null Inquisitor when he was talking about, as it was a good example for the in terms of consistencies in logic for a game, using that Star Trek analogy of, the officer or the captain or whatever doesn't leave without an escort if it's in a dangerous zone, and they're all in dangerous zones. And a player told the player who was playing a captain, like, hey, you can't go down there. All because the logic in that setting says that they can't, in terms of legalities, doesn't mean that the person can still, is not paralyzed from doing so. So it's moments where that logic, in terms of being aware of it, enhances the story even more. Like, oh, he's not supposed to go down there. He's breaking, part of the code. So, what's going to happen afterwards? Will he still even survive going down there? Intrigue occurs just from that alone. So there's a lot to be rewarded for being consistent in terms of with logics. But overall, I'm going to take some... yes, there we go. I've written some notes down just so that way I can try to address everything you were talking about in the video. Same old G. And by the way, this is Alex. I would have said it at the intro, but I wanted to have the intro have a meaning in terms of an impact. All right. It's a fantasy, not reality. That was a statement that, paraphrase statement that you made in the video. And the truth is that it's a reality to the characters. And if you want to pretend that, especially with the whole immersion crowd, dogs barking, but I know I make fun of people who are really into immersion, and that's just because there are so many, inconsistencies that occur with immersion in terms of the logical consistencies you were talking about, that it's important to point out from time to time. But when you are trying to be immersed in your character, a lot of times you are trying to grasp at the foundation of imagination set within that setting. Because of that, you are trying to find consistencies to shape the reality that you're trying to perceive for your character. That is why it is important to be consistent and to address the logic found in that world. Like, for an example, in a Star Wars game, it is the RPG, at least the old D20 model, didn't really address the story logic that people are accustomed to from the movies. It mainly addressed the book logic in terms of stormtroopers are actually competent. Things like that. You actually had to be careful of them and be wary because you would probably die. If someone was just used to the movies in terms of their understanding of the logic, then that would be, they would complain about it quite a bit. And I really don't like the idea of complaint in terms of as a negative thing, because it's mainly used as like, oh, I'm complaining. It's funny, but that's semantics. Anyways, a fever dream is just as annoying as nitpicking logic. And this goes back to the fantasy and reality in terms of, like, yes, it is awesome that you are having a cool story bro moment, but if it doesn't make sense to the players, it's just as entertaining as a bunch of strobe lights flashing their eyes. It was like, oh, there's colors, oh, there's things occurring, but it doesn't have any meaning to the person experiencing it. At that point, it's just you fapping in front of your friends or the players and saying like, oh, look how cool my story is. Oh, bask in the awesomeness of my story. Stuff like that. That's annoying. And another thing is if you are giving up the reasons for a consistency, a logic in your story that isn't addressed, you're kind of just going through the motions of a story. And that is just, it bores me more than ignoring trying to make sense of it all. Because at that point, it's like, what's the point of my input as a player? Again, it goes back to, or just tell us your story if it's that important to you. Fall along those lines. And this is another nitpick in terms of, equal blame, all that kind of stuff. It reminds me of like the moral relativism where, no, there are some actual, like, things that can be addressed as in like, oh yeah, that was that particular person's problem. That happens to me all the time. It's probably going to happen to me now after I finish recording this, where I'll say something and not have helped you, the listener, fully understand what I'm getting at. And because of that, I will suffer the consequences of not fully helping you understand what I'm saying. Therefore, it is my fault. It's not 100%, but it's not equal. You probably messed up, Sam OG, in addressing fully what the setting is going to be about. And they didn't understand what your intentions were. So, yes, you can tit for tat say it's equal, but it's more on the GM who started the game setup, or whoever initiated the game and run it, which would be you. But that's just me being a jerk. So overall, yes, the message is it's important to be consistent because your players are just as important as you are. And if you treat the game like you own it, then that's a very destructive way to go about playing games. Because you end up not allowing some really cool things to happen when you give up control just for brief moments of time. I think I should do a video about that because there's some cool scenes I want to discuss of what happens when I don't, like when a GM doesn't fully control the players in terms of controlling the arc of where the story goes, because the story is your story, it's not their story, and because of that, you're doing a disservice to the players by not telling their story, and that's about it. So I will go ahead and turn you off, and hopefully that was something. Have a good one.